Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalet. I'm your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Gadget of the week this week is the Pi-KVM. Now, you might remember a few weeks ago I talked about a Raspberry Pi based KVM, but this one was designed by a company. It was called Tiny Pilot, and Tiny Pilot was designed by a company, and so you have to order it through them. Now, I have one of these devices on the way, and I think it's pretty cool, and I'm still going to play with it. But Steve Ovens, who lurks around in the community, pointed me towards Pi-KVM. The thing that I like about Pi-KVM is, much like Tiny Pilot, it's a Raspberry Pi based KVM. The difference here is that this one is designed to be built inside of your basement. And so they provide the operating system, they have all of the software, but you build this device. They support the Raspberry Pi 2, 3, and 4, and Raspberry Pi Zero. It supports full HD using their advanced HDMI to SCI. So I looked this up. It's essentially the Raspberry Pi version of a PCI adapter that will allow you to take HDMI video in. And so they claim that reduces the latency of the video by over 100 milliseconds. Now, you remember that the Tiny Pilot is doing everything over USB, so this seems like the way to go. Additionally, to support bootable virtual CD-ROM and flash drives, obviously the keyboard and mouse with LEDs and wheels are supported and forwarded through to the remote IP KVM. You have the ability to control the server or host computer by using power and ATX functions. You access this through a web UI or through VNC. And you have the ability to use IPMI, OpenBMC, Wake on LAN to control the server. And of course, they have all of the SSL done for you, and they have health monitoring for the Pi. They claim that the cost is between $30 and $100 to get all the parts, and of course, it's 100% open source. So if you're not following what we're talking about when we say an IP KVM, if you are doing support for your mother or your grandmother, and you're in a different geographical location than she is, now obviously we can get remote screen share software to work. That's obviously the way to go. But oftentimes, what ends up happening is you're not in the same geographical location, and the part of the computer that is not working correctly is before you can get the software to load, or the computer is so bad that you can't get the software to load. In some cases, you need to reinstall the operating system entirely. And in those cases, no amount of remote support software is going to do the trick. You're going to have to get console-level access to that computer. There have been solutions, the Spider comes to mind, is what I'm most familiar with, that have existed from companies like Lantronix for years, but of course they're very expensive. And so as open sources continue to take off, and as integrating this hardware directly into the Raspberry Pi has continued to take off, now these products are becoming available. And so I've ordered there's a cable that you have to order, and a couple other little pieces. So I've got those on the way. I'm going to give both of these a shot, and I'll let you know what the end result is. But I can't imagine we will continue to use the Spider after this, because the thing about the Spider is, and again, it's a great product from Lantronix that I've been very happy with up until this point, but at the end of the day, it runs inside of this Java applet that has to render inside of the browser. And Ice-T works pretty well, but it's still a pain to use. This is using all modern web components, and so it's just an HTML5 page that loads on a Raspberry Pi. And the other thing that's advantageous is, again, Lantronix I think it's a $400 device, $500 device, and so if we can put this together for $100, we might add a little bit onto that, because we tend to put them in nicer cases, flirt case, and have a fan for some cooling, especially with the Pi 4s. They get pretty warm. But this is the way to go, and this is the way to get console-level access to stuff remotely. I remember just a few years ago when we were having discussions Guys were building terminal servers out of Raspberry Pis and putting them in connected to legacy hardware, things that you required Telnet and stuff like that to get in, or had serial consoles. And they were tying those things to Raspberry Pis. It's great that now we can tie any computer, so you can have remote control of literally any device, any operating system, because as long as it supports USB and HDMI, you're able to get that into a Raspberry Pi, and then you're able to transfer that back to a remote location. Now, imagine this. We've talked a little bit about remotely.1, and obviously, since then, what I've learned is that the project doesn't have a lot of active maintainership, so we're continuing to experiment with it, and we're continuing to see where it goes and how it works. But it does cross my mind, right? We are at a place now where the technology exists, where if you're a company that does PC support, and you have techs that are in the field, and you have techs that are probably very smart, but they live behind their computer because that's how people that are the best at fixing that stuff, that's the kind of lifestyle they want to live. So you have those two people, and you're trying to get them connected with a customer. I can absolutely see a very workable flow whereby which these very smart people who are capable of solving problems but are always behind a keyboard, you can have a whole group of other people that can go out and get customers and or people that need that help and get them paired up with the right technical person, because the internet is broad and those experts in that individual field can be spread up any geographical area. The power here is pretty tremendous, right? You could potentially get to a point where somebody opens up a service ticket and says, I have this problem, and that ticket goes into the queue, and this person says, I know how to fix that, and they say, well, I need console level access for that, and so they respond in the ticket that they need console level access, and somebody that is just getting started in the field might go out there with one of these devices, plug it in, and that person joins the queue, and now the more experienced technician is able to immediately go from working on one project to the next. So when you start trying to look at the practical implementation of these things, they're powerful on their own. Pi-KVM is a very powerful tool, and we've used it with great success for a number of years at Ultispeed. But it's when you start to integrate those and tie those things together with other software projects. So whether it's a piece of software that's installed and I'm able to remotely access the machine, much like Simple Help, or it's one of these Pi-KVMs, either way, the workflow to the person on the back end is the same. And again, that modularity and that forward momentum of open source, both on the hardware side and on the software side, is what makes something like this possible. So if you want more information, I invite you to check out their GitHub, github.com/Pi-KVM. They also have a Discord community, and you can join them and talk about it. They're saying that the prototypes, they're going to build them, and you'll actually be able to purchase if you don't want to build it yourself. Prototypes will be ready at Q4 2020, and pre-orders are going to be available sooner. So if you're considering ordering a wholesale lot, then they give an email address. And so we may reach out to them. I think I'm going to start by building one and just kind of see what I think about it. And then if it works out, we'll go from there. Get open phones this hour, 855-450-NO. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. That is the number to join. Make your voice heard. Become a part of the program. So Amazon is officially announcing the general availability of Bottlerocket, an open source Linux distribution purpose-built to run containers. What Amazon is aiming for here is increased security primarily, but the other thing is they're just trying to make it easier and more efficient and more secure to be on AWS than anywhere else. Bottlerocket, quote, improves security by including only the software needed to run containers, which reduced the security attack surface. It uses security-enhanced Linux, also known as SE Linux, in enforcing mode to increase the isolation between containers and the host operating system. In addition to standard Linux kernel technologies, to implement isolation between containerized workloads such as control groups, also known as C groups, namespaces, and CComps. Bottlerocket uses device mappers target DMVT, a Linux kernel feature that provides integrity checking to help prevent attackers from persisting threats on the OS, such as overwriting core system software. The modern Linux kernel in Bottlerocket includes eBPF, which reduces the need for kernel modules and many low-level system operations. Large parts of Bottlerocket are written in Rust, a modular programming language that helps ensure thread safety and prevent memory-related errors such as buffer overflows that can lead to security vulnerabilities. Now, we have only recently started moving some of our stuff over to containers at Ultispeed. I think our website runs on it. And obviously, Matrix is running on it. but everything else is still running on VMs. They're not running inside of containers. And so containers have become somewhat new to my daily life. Been aware of them, and I know that they're useful at great scale, but it's only recently that in the smaller business world that they have started popping up. And so a tool like this, an operating system specifically designed around containers and designed to increase the security of containers, is very appealing to me, particularly when I start digging into the guts of exactly what Amazon has done there and what some of these technologies are and how it works. BPF, for example, I went through the presentation that Amazon had on why they believe this is a better way to handle network integration. And essentially, the way it works is if you imagine from the hardware standpoint, you have the actual Ethernet card, the hardware. From there, it's talking to the kernel. From the kernel, it splits. It splits into typical system calls, which then has user mode applications on top of it. That's a typical flow. But at that split at the kernel, in addition to system calls, you also have BPF helper calls. And then this connects directly to the kernel mode BPF applications. And so this gives those applications more direct access, I guess I should say, to the actual hardware, and kind of circumvents the typical user space way that these applications have to access the network interface. And the thing is, they've added a new program and process state model, which essentially makes more efficient use of the processor. And this gives them so much better performance on the network that the study that they've actually done, that Amazon cites to show how much better BPF is referencing the work with BPF that Netflix and Facebook have done. So Netflix gives some statistics here: 150,000 Amazon EC2 server instances, 130 million subscribers, and 14 active BPF programs on every instance so far. So I mean, this is really cool, and the way that somebody has looked at this and said, okay, for 50 years we've had one process model, and now all of a sudden we're going to look and find a more efficient way to let these applications talk through the network. For debugging, they have something called their admin container, and this is something that Bottlerocket is using, Bottlerocket's API, that can then tie into the AWS system manager or user data. And you can log in with SSH for advanced debugging and troubleshooting, stuff like that. The admin container, as they're calling it, is a Amazon Linux 2 container image and contains utilities for troubleshooting and debugging Bottlerocket, which runs with elevated privileges. It also allows you to install a standard debugging tools such as traceroute, strace, TCP dump. The act of logging into an individual Bottlerocket instance is intended to be an infrequent operation for advanced debugging or troubleshooting. So they are trying to get to a place where these servers just do what they have to do. And you basically say, I want a server to do this thing. And because the process of rolling out the thing is more or less decided, and because it's all fairly standardized and runs inside of the standardized containerized environment, they basically get the variables that they need to set up your specific instance, and then Amazon will take care of the rest. And the tech here, the tech in the story is very cool. Again, the more I read about BPF and the more I learned about why Amazon is doing this, it's very, very cool. And there are some major advantages. And I shouldn't say Amazon is doing this with BPF, because lots of open source and open standards bodies have pushed and continued to move the needle forward here. But if you have a container-heavy workload, I'd be interested to hear a tale from the wild as these start to pop up. If you're running that and you say to yourself, hey, this would be a perfect solution for us, then I would like to hear from you. You need to send me an email at live@asknoahshow.com. And I would like to hear how this works in a real-world scenario. And, you just know there's going to be some cool stuff and some cool forks that come out of things like this, because all of this work is being done out in the open. And this is the coolest part to me. The coolest part to me is not that Amazon built an AWS-specific distro for running containers on Amazon platforms. That's okay, it makes it easier and a little bit more approachable, but there's nothing terribly exciting. And let's be honest, all of these really cool integration features, they all rely on Amazon and Amazon's API and the integration with Amazon and AWS. And it's all structured from the standpoint that you're going to buy more services from Amazon and AWS. And I'm not a fan of cloud providers, and I'm not a fan of vendor lock-in. All of that said, one of the things that we almost always get the short end of the stick in the Linux world is on polish. The thing that we're trying to do usually works in Linux, but there's usually a shinier, prettier way to do it on Mac OS or Windows. And I can count numbers of examples of this throughout the week in where something, it's the web version or the whatever, works fine, and then there's just a little extra polish if you're using one of those two magic operating systems. And this is a moment, or at least a moment as I was reading through this article today, where this stuff is going to work flawlessly because Amazon writes the checks that gets the kind of open source developer talent that it takes to build a purpose-specific distro like this, and then flush out all of the bugs, get it tied to all of the fancy things, and then make it scalable, then make it easy, then produce material on how everybody can use this new thing that they've created, and then promote it to make it a standard. And all of those things are happening now, and the code, the result of that, is open code that's available on GitHub. Amazon is developing this stuff out in the open because you told them that that matters now, and they don't have a choice but to listen to you. You can be a company worth billions, and you still have to create an account on GitHub, and you still have to publish your code there the way that every other FOSS developer does, because that's the right way to write code. That's how we know it's secure. That's how we know it's reliable. That's how we know that we can take that thing and use it somewhere else. And this is a moment where I think FOSS is standing on its own two legs. And this is a major company that would rather put the source out on the internet so that anyone can build this, because the tech culture has evolved to the point now where we have told them this is what is expected in the professional corporate world. You want to build technology that lasts, it better be open. And now, thanks to Amazon putting this amount of money and this amount of time and this amount of work, anyone can build a better AWS. If such a time comes that we need to build a bit better AWS. I remember the first time that I learned that FreeNAS could speak S3, and that now you could set up a FreeNAS box that could deliver the same backend type of storage that Amazon, you would get with Amazon with AWS. And I start thinking to myself what the real world ramifications of framing open source in that way is. I was reading this week a interview with the founder of Backblaze. He started the company and he went live on day one with 2 servers and a bunch of USB hard drives plugged into 2 small Dell towers. And if you're thinking to yourself as a person who has used a machine with a bunch of USB anything on it, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and it didn't take long. It took about 1 hour. And the next version 1 of their now famous storage pod, which is their servers built specifically for the purpose of just maxing out the amount of drives that you can putting in this chassis in a top-down enclosure, they built it out of plywood, or I think it was his friend built it out of plywood in their garage, because they didn't have access to a metal shop. So they built it out of wood in his garage, put the hard drives in it, and took it back to their business and put it online because that's what they had to do. And it's that real world bite that I hear from other business owners in their voice, and I can feel it, I can smell it, because I've been there. And it furthers my belief that all success in business is really just piles of failure that you stand on top of. And I've said that many times on the show. But this story speaks to me, and this story is exciting to me because anybody that's been in business can relate to this. Anybody that has been in business can relate to the concept of you have an idea. You just know that Dell can't possibly charge that much money for a server, and there has to be a way that you can undercut them and you can do a better job for less money, less overhead, with less complication. And it might not be as redundant, it might not be as cool and fancy and have all the branding and all of that, but you can get the job done, and you understand that. And so you set out to do that thing, and he knew what he was doing. He researched the specs for USB, and it was supposed to support 100 and some drives, but it fell apart after 5 drives, because what he learned was that you don't know what you don't know, and you just pray that you learn those lessons before it's a big job and it's something big enough to take you out. And I've told everybody that we've ever hired at Altispeed that the most important thing that they can offer the company and me specifically is a second insight. Give me some insight that I didn't previously have. Help me understand something from a perspective that I didn't previously have. Help me learn lessons through your experiences, and then help me let you learn lessons through the experiences and knowledge that I have. That was the old saying, he with understanding is imparted with knowledge, right? And that tends to be popular in the small business world. If you go and talk with other people out there that either work in small business or own small business, most people want to chat and just want to talk about what lessons they've learned and what thing works. And IT guys are the same way. We want to share that knowledge. It's a natural way because we get excited about the tech. We don't really care about how the people above us turn that into money. And so, but the corporate people, it's always about corporate secrets. We can't share that because it's corporate secrets. These are our secrets, and everything has to be encrypted, and it has to be hidden away, and it has to be private and proprietary, and we have to write big, huge deals with other companies and those kinds of things. The model here is what is exciting. Not that Amazon is writing a platform for AWS. Now it's Amazon's budget to maintain this operating system. Now it's Amazon's budget to deal with the quality assurance and the timeline and the project management and the developers and all of the other things that go along with doing a really good job on a project and making a project so good and so production ready that anybody can deploy it inside of their business, whether you're working for Altaspeed Technologies, a tiny little company in Grand Forks, North Dakota, or you're working for Microsoft and you just need to, or Netflix, and you need to store your data so that you can stream content to 150 million people. Either way, you're going to use open source technology to do it. And now Amazon is going to pay to build that open source technology, and they're doing it out in the open. One of the largest shopping businesses to ever exist in the history of man just created a new Linux distribution. That code is available to everybody with an internet connection and a GitHub account because of what open source has been pushing for the last 10 years. Longer than that, really. So I'm super happy about that story. Case that wasn't clear. Hate to be unclear. It's no secret that the world that we live in today, internet is becoming prolific. One of the sales shticks that I use is when I sit down with hotel operators or when I sit down with people in their business, I tell them, today in 2020, the internet's like hot water. So whereas a few years ago, you wouldn't have thought about when the plumber tells you, you got to upgrade your hot water heater because you want to provide hot water to each one of these rooms. It's an expense, yes, but it's people expect hot water when they stay in a hotel. Same thing with internet today. People, when they go into a restaurant, when they go into a hotel, they expect internet. And I recently have been relying almost exclusively on Matrix. And for most of us, we're keenly aware anytime we're quote unquote disconnected or out of contact. And it turns out the U.S. military is suffering from being out of real-time contact. And they're looking to fix that by building a network in space. Hey, you heard that right. And they're doing this the open source style. And again, what the thing that speaks to me in the story is the fact that the way that they're going about this. So on Monday, the Space Development Agency announced new contracts to Lockheed Martin and York Space Systems for the development of space vehicles that would operate in the transport layer around the Earth. This language obfuscates what is actually a pretty big deal in how the U.S. military plans to communicate and control its weapon systems in the coming decades. With new contracts, these two Colorado-based companies will each build 10 relatively small satellites, likely on the order of 100 to 200 kilograms. Each will be launched no later than September of 2022, and they'll essentially be test satellites for what will eventually grow into a constellation of what the article says is 700 satellites at roughly 1 kilometer above the Earth's surface. So mind you, in the past, the way that this has happened before is somebody is going to send a satellite up into space. And of course, that's an expensive proposition. So everybody and their brother says, well, if we're sending one up to space, here's what I want to put on it. And I need a camera, and I need this sensor, and I need that sensor, and I need this thing, and I need that feature, and I need this radio. And the thing that is different this time around is instead of these large, very multi-purpose satellites, they're finding that it's more cost-effective and it's more efficient to have satellites that have lesser purposes or even a single purpose, and then just cycle them out when they fall, when they become damaged or they stop functioning or whatever. the article goes on to say, effectively, this will allow for a global network which military can track the movement of ground-based objects as well as missile threats, relay this information to battle management layer, and that will provide automatic space-based command and control decisions to validate targets and relay this targeting data to weapon systems, presumably on the ground. Currently, the military does not have the capability to do tactical low-latency communication and targeting beyond line of sight. They said that the Space Development Agency Director Derek Turner will, during a call with reporters by 2024, he said that the agency hopes to have deployed more than 100 transport satellites to begin offering initial warfighting capability that will allow for this. Okay, so I'm going to leave the whole warfighting thing out. Somebody else can take that discussion. But here's what's interesting to me. Okay, so you have the military, and they're moving away from these large, expensive jack-of-all-trades satellites. And the new plan, the military plans to deploy these smaller satellites with fewer functions that have more redundancy. And I guess the first thing that stands out to me is this is literally the Linux and open source model way of doing things, right? You go and they specifically reference in the article that they are looking to move towards smaller, more off-the-shelf type components. If you think about it, that's all you're doing is saying that there's somebody out there that makes the best, I'm just going to make up a part, onboard camera diagnostic thermal sensor, the little thing that takes the temperature of some non-critical component. I'm sure there's a bunch of manufacturers that make that thing, and the community at large, particularly the makerspace, has gone through and figured out, here are the manufacturers that make these particular components. And now, the space agency can go out and just say, hey, we can just use these off-the-shelf components, and they've already been vetted, they've already been tested, and we'll see how they work, do some additional testing to make sure that they're going to work in space. But this is the open source way of doing things. Once that's discovered, and particularly their relationship with this newer, smaller company, York Space Systems. For those of you that don't follow NASA and the military's contract, Lockheed Martin has gotten contracts with the U.S. military for years. And so York Space Systems, by comparison, is very small. And the United States is taking a chance with them and hoping that this is going to work out and that there are other players in the game that they can start working with. So everybody is, apparently, including the United States and the military, is going this route. And that by the same token that things that were born in the home lab often make their way into the enterprise because the geek who played with it in his home lab is the guy who figures out what works well in production. At the same time, you're going to have that same kind of thing happening with your tax dollars now because governments are getting hip to this. I guess there are some people in the Mumble channel that are saying they're having some problems. That's I think I just accidentally moved channels there, so I apologize. You can join us in the Mumble room, or you can join us in the Jitsi room. Just join our Matrix instance at matrix.linuxdelta.com. You can connect inside of Noah's booth. We've got a Jitsi room, and they hang out and participate in the chat room. That's one way to make your voice heard. Otherwise, you can call us at 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Whatever the worldwide community has to offer, that's now up for grabs. And that's what this program is doing, is when somebody comes up with a different way to do something, even when it's in space, these are things that are now going to be considered. And so congratulations to the space agency for their step towards a future space network. It will be exceptionally interesting to watch how we build a communication network in space. And then the other thing, and I was talking to my wife about this before I came to the studio today, it's going to be exciting to see how in what form this technology trickles down to the rest of us. Obviously, I'm sure war-fighting space communication systems are not going to be, open for general use. But over time, as this network becomes, a larger reality and more things get moved onto it, I would imagine there's all sorts of opportunities for interconnection and the ability for people to use, regular people, non-military people, for non-warfighting reasons, to be able to use a satellite network that connects everybody. So it'll be cool to see that. Speaking of getting connected to everybody, Linux Fest 2015, I want to take you back. It was a red-eye flight when I was coming in for Linux Fest. I usually fly in a few days early to hang out with Chris and kind of hang out. And so I'm trying to stay awake on this flight, and it's a long flight because starting North Dakota, you got to go the wrong way east to get to Minneapolis, the air hub, before I can start going actually west to get to SeaTac. So I'm on this 4.5-hour flight. I'm on the IRC in the in-flight Wi-Fi, and I start talking to some people in various chat rooms, and I bump into a guy named Adram. I start talking to him. He's a pretty cool guy. And so we're having a conversation, and all of a sudden I land, so I tell him, hey, I'm going to have to be off for a while because I got to go do the dance. And so I land, shuttle to the rental car place, get the rental car, drive to the hotel, check in, put my bags away, get my laptop back out, log back into IRC. Now we're at like 3 a.m, right? There's Adram. We pick up where we left off a few hours ago. So it's 3 a.m., and I find out he's staying in the same hotel because it's close to where the fest is, and he's hanging out in the lobby. So I think to myself, well, it's time to get dressed and go back and meet this guy. I want to hang out. So I go back down. We end up hanging out the rest of the night, and I go back up and crash at like 5 or 6, sleep for a few hours, and then get up and start doing Linux Fest Northwest. And I have hung out with him every single year since then until last year, when I later found out that he had a change in his job and wasn't able to attend Linux Fest Northwest. The problem is, we were connected at one time on IRC. I'm sure there were a couple of other communication platforms in between there, but over time, people move around. So we go from Viber to Telegram to WhatsApp to Facebook to iMessage, text message, Discord. You can't keep them all straight. And so ever since Self, I've been kind of trying to live over on Matrix. And the thing about Matrix for me is I'm so sick of moving from one platform to another. Seems like every time I get everybody caught up in my life, all of a sudden we all jump and go to a different platform. And there are still people that are stuck on IRC, and it's a fantastic messaging protocol, no doubt. But the reality is, even though you can work around this in 2020, at its core, it's just not built for security and federation the way that Matrix is. And so here I am living on Matrix and slowly bringing all of my friends and family over there. And what I'm noticing is that the bridging functionality of Matrix, if it did nothing more, if all Synapse did was give me a client that I could bridge other chats to, that would be enough in life. And, whether if you work at Altispeed, you're just a Matrix chat to me. If you're an SMS message, you're just a Matrix room to me. If you're an email, you're just a Matrix room to me. If you're a Telegram group, you're just a Matrix room to me. Like, everything shows up the same and works the same. And I've been enjoying that so much that it's worth overlooking what sets Matrix apart from other messengers. That ability to bridge, even though it may not be as user-friendly as some other messengers. So lo and behold, Adra, my old friend, shows up natively on Matrix. So we connect, we start talking, and I click on his user, and I find out that his user is hosted on our Linux Delta server, which you can sign up for an account at riot.linuxdelta.com. So he didn't know this, but earlier that day, we were doing some upgrades to the server because the increased user load that we're seeing has caused the server to slow down a bit. And so I reach out to my team, and I said, what are we doing about this? And they said, well, one of the cool things about Matrix is that the Synapse server has essentially Python programs called workers. And the Synapse workers are what actually process each message, encrypt, decrypt, forward on, all of that. And so what's happening is the server is getting slow because this worker is now maxing out the cores available on the server. I said, okay, so we can upgrade the server, then we have more cores and it just works. And I said, no, essentially we can spin up additional Synapse workers, and then they can process additional messages. And as that user load has increased, and as I have watched how seamlessly and flawlessly it has become to upgrade the scale of the server, it is clear to me that this is a protocol and this is a messaging system that's designed from the ground up to be scalable. Did some more digging, did a little bit more reading because I wanted to understand exactly what kind of server specifications are used in production in real-world environments. Come to find out that the French government has standardized on the Matrix protocol, and they have 300,000 users that are communicating using the Matrix protocol. And they've actually released the software that they're using, because obviously they're not using Element and Synapse. They have their own implementation, but they've released that as open source, and you can go download it and use it. And so again, I say to myself, this is incredible. The Matrix folks have a specific container Docker container that spins up as that and has the ability to move the media content, which is the place where user, media is uploaded to, onto an AWS instance instead of the Synapse server itself, because it's one of the cheapest places to store stuff. And so at Altispeed, we've been able to set up a user flow by which the user logs into their Nextcloud interface, and the element chat is actually presented to them because it's embedded into that Nextcloud environment. And so they only have to log into one place. That chat is just there presented to them. And at every turn, it's just clear to me that Matthew and his team got it right. They got it right, and they get it when it comes to messaging. They understand how this stuff works. And if Matrix isn't for you, that's fine, because it can literally bridge to almost anything. But the way they have approached this is from the standpoint of standardization. The Matrix protocol imposes very little restrictions on a lot of things, even to include authentication. They leave a lot of that open. And the idea is so that anybody can host a Synapse home server just like you host an email server. And anybody can have an account on there, and anybody can exchange messages. And at this point, I have most of my families and friends testing on Matrix, and we're testing it at Altispeed for full deployment. And as I continue down this journey with Matrix, all anyone ever has to do is continue to keep the client up to date. And if they've chosen to park their account on a reliable home server, then they're going to stay in contact with everybody on the Matrix universe. And so as I sat there looking at my friend Adrian's account that's hosted on Linux Delta, I thought, it's great, because earlier today, when we took the time to increase the server capacity to make sure that the people that are parked there have a good experience, I'm ensuring my own continued contact with a close friend of mine. And that will be true going forward. And so I've taken the red pill. I've gone down the Matrix rabbit hole, and I love it not because it's the most user intuitive thing to use, but because it's built for scaling. It's built to be self-hosted. It's encrypted by default. They allow you to manage those keys so that they're secure, and that creates a couple extra hoops to jump through, but at least I trust it, and at least I don't have to worry about information getting out. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to overstate it. Signing up isn't that difficult. I mean, you're essentially choosing your password and a recovery phrase to protect your private key. But there's a dialog to specify which home server you want to connect to. And so if you're not connecting to matrix.org, the default one, then you need to specify that. Ours is matrix.linuxdelta.com. There's some others in the open source community that are hosting them. It's not complicated, but it can be confusing, particularly if you're a click and run kind of person. Download the app and open it up. And so I thought I would just take a couple minutes and say, first of all, thanks to all of those that have come and hung out in the Matrix instance. If you want to sign up there's a web interface, you can join at riot.linuxdelta.com. The server itself is matrix.linuxdelta.com. So if you download Element yourself, of course, you can register for an account just by doing that. And Eric, the IT guy, has written a guide for Front Page Linux that literally walks you through this step by step. And so when I said it sounded complicated or a little bit confusing, if that's you and you're saying to yourself, man, I would love to play with this, I don't have the time or energy to set this up, come over to Front Page Linux, check out the guide. We'll have it linked for you at podcast.asknoahshow.com. And you can go onto the web interface of our Matrix instance, sign yourself up for an account, and we have the Geek Lab, which is bridged to all of the places right now. If you're existing in the Telegram group, then you're part of the same discussion. We're hoping to get that tied into the on-air chat room, and so that everybody can participate in all one place. And then for the more fireside style chat, we've got Noah's booth, where I and a few other cohorts just kind of hang out all day and talk tech and talk about what we're doing. The phrase "good morning" has recently been banned. But yeah, come check out Matrix. It's a better way to message. It was designed to be like email. And so you can set up your own home server. I did it just so that I could walk through the process of setting up a home server. It was literally as simple as installing a single package and making the firewall adjustment. And then I was able to connect. And if you want to enable registration, that's one config change. If you want to enable federation, in other words, the ability to send messages to any Matrix server, that's where it takes a few more steps. But we've done all of that for you, matrix.linuxdelta.com. So you can sign up and chat with us, interact with us there. Feedback. Our first email tonight So I'm late to listening this week's episode, but I just heard the guy call in about not getting internet from his bridge on his VMs. I'm curious if he's running Docker. I have a home server with an R710 with libvirt and VMs and multiple network bridges. I had a lot of weird issues when I decided to install Docker on the host Ubuntu 18.04. It killed all my VMs. After some troubleshooting, it came back to the fact that the Docker install changes the default firewall policy for forwarding to deny by default. Swap it back, make a specific allow rules, and got me up and running. Sounds like a possibility for that caller, so yeah, he may want to check out what his forwarding policy is on his host firewall. Brett. Hey, thanks, Brett, for writing into the program. It's interesting, I had another issue with the firewall where it was preventing Virt Manager from connecting to the Spice interface. And so if inside of libvirtd you don't have the option for the listening interface to be all interfaces, it will not connect, and the firewall blocks it. So we made a firewall rule and changed that to listen to all connections, and that fixed that issue. So if you're having issues with VMs and network bridges, definitely take a look at your firewall rules, and particularly true if you're running any of those in Docker or containers. Our second email, I have set up a new Ubuntu server with 64 gigs of RAM and a 15 terabyte in LVM, but I thought I should have set up the drives in ZFS. I've talked myself into redoing the setup with ZFS, but should I go with FreeNAS and run a VM with Ubuntu to install the Docker images I need? I want to have a file server, Plex, Unify, and a Windows 10 VM for when I need to VPN into work. What or how would you set this up? I do have a couple of Raspberry Pis, but I dislike running anything to control my network or entertainment. Jonathan. So first of all, I want to commend you for not wanting to run anything to control your network or entertainment. It's one of the primary reasons I stay away from the Unify platform for routers, is they don't offer you a lot of local control, and if that appliance goes down, you're in a lot of trouble. So as far as how to set this up, first of all, I guess we'll start with this. If I was going to go the ZFS route, I would just use ZFS on your Ubuntu server. I don't really see any value in setting up FreeNAS in this particular instance. If you told me that you were primarily concerned about storing files and longevity and wanted to expand your file system and have that running, you're going to set up a dedicated file server, I would decidedly go the FreeNAS route. But when you say you want to have a file server, Plex, Unify, and a Windows 10 VM, then what I'm hearing is what you want is a virtual host. And then aside, one of the things that you want to virtualize maybe is your file server, or maybe your file server will grow to the point that it will become its own dedicated device. In any event, what I would do is I would set Ubuntu up. If it's already set up with LVM, it's probably fine. You're watching for smart status and you're watching for drives to give you an indication of any issue, but LVM, like CFS to a degree, allows you to migrate data on or off a drive. And so swapping a drive inside of an LVM setup is not a bad way to go. And indeed, there's plenty of production servers that run that way. If you decide to go the ZFS route, though, I would go with OpenZFS just in Ubuntu itself. And then I would still use libvirtd for the virtualization software. And then I would just run your Plex and Unify and Windows 10 VM all as guests for on top of your host. Now, when it comes to the file server, you could actually virtualize FreeNAS. A lot of people out there say that you can't virtualize FreeNAS. It's not true. You can. You just have to do a little bit of tweaking. And essentially, what happens when you virtualize FreeNAS is that FreeNAS expects direct access to the disks. And so when ZFS asks for a flush and it wants to flush the cache and actually tell it, now I need you to write to disks and I need you to do that now, ZFS expects that it's not going to be lied to. And if the hypervisor lies, then that's where you run into some issues with ZFS data. And so IX Systems has actually done a fantastic job bringing this up and going through exactly how to properly virtualize FreeNAS. And so my suggestion to you would be to review their article. I'll have it linked for you in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our 3-day email tonight. Hey, Noah, I recently bit the bullet and purchased an RTL SDR starter kit from Amazon with a dipole antenna and various mounts. I received the kit and was able to get it up and running in Linux at a basic level, pulling in FM radio and even some local flight information. I'm completely new to the world of software-defined radio, and I don't really have any idea what I'm doing. Do you have any starter guides, applications, or general recommendations that you can share? Things that you wish you knew when you were getting started? Would love to get your input. Thanks. Love the show. Ray. So I have a couple of links I'm going to share with you. The first is rtl-sdr.com, and they actually have a Linux distro with SDR software support built in. The project is called Gorziernot RTL-SDR. So I'll have both of those linked for you in the show notes, and you can check those out. I've only played with SDR myself to a limited degree. I've gotten more into packet radio and sending information that way. The thing that is exciting about SDR, and why I encourage anybody out there that if you've not played with it or have not looked into it, what's cool about it is everything that is broadcast in the world is broadcast on some frequency. And up until very recently, you had to buy a specific hardware device to receive that frequency. Recently now, and they've been very expensive. They're thousands of dollars sometimes. More recently, though, these receivers for those specific frequencies have come down in price, and so now you can purchase these devices that are able to receive a wide range of frequencies, and they're all programmed right from your computer. And so the device actually does the receiving, but all of the audio is decoded and processed into your computer. And this opens up some additional advantages. Oftentimes I hear people talk about ham radio as if it's this outdated hobby that is people sitting with tubes and radios in their room and sending Morse code to each other in the middle of the night. And that's not what the hobby is about. And I think this email is a great way to illustrate that. Software-defined radio and some of the things that are happening with digital radio are allowing people to communicate in entirely new ways. And again, much true to the same things that we value in open source. They're not looking for any sort of central infrastructure. When you're using your software-defined radio, you're able to pick up a direct radio communication, a direct radio transmission from somebody else, even if that person is using SDR. And this is an empowering part of ham radio, and this is where the hobby is really kind of on the bleeding edge. People are using this technology to provide internet in places that previously didn't have internet, to get camera feeds and audio feeds to places that didn't previously have at those lines of communication. And so, and I've had the opportunity to see these pretty much at any Linux Fest you go to. There is some carve out of the ham radio operators, and they're sitting there doing their thing or demonstrating something. That certainly was the case back at Scale this year. And so to watch some of these projects that have come out now that are based on software-defined radio or based on digital radio technology is really exciting. And then this I threw in here at the last minute. Dave writes in and asks if we have any tips for people who are sending their kids back to school, and wrote a very nice email talking about how his daughter's going back to school and any of the concerns that I've had or how I've addressed them. And so it's interesting. My wife and I had this discussion with our kids. They came home from the first day of school, and they had a notice, a thing that we had to sign. We didn't have to, but we opted to sign up for insurance. And the insurance was $20 per kid and for their school-issued devices. Now, third grade and up is getting Chromebooks. Second grade below is their tablets. And so we started having this talk with our kids, and about appropriate ways to explore technology. And obviously, the school was not an appropriate place to explore technology, and school technology isn't an appropriate place to explore that. And my son shared a story that some of the kids that he went to school with over the summer during COVID, when they had their school devices at home, were not aware that their teachers got notifications every time they went to YouTube and streamed a video. And so their class got a good laugh out of some of the videos that these kids had watched, and that was, documented by the school. And this led to a fairly large discussion at our house about responsible use of technology and the privacy that comes with this stuff, because the reality is that there is a number of different software platforms that are out there specifically to help teachers keep tabs on what kids are doing on these electronic devices. And that's fine anytime you're in a classroom setting or doing your schoolwork. It's not so fine when there are reports of this happening outside of school hours, and this is problematic. Now, I want to be clear, this is not happening in Grand Forks. I have no firsthand experience with that. I've simply seen the lawsuits that have arisen from it. But if you're asking me how I approached that situation or how I dealt with that in our house, we sat our kids down and told them, everything you do today, from the papers that you write to the pictures you take, are potentially going to be with you for a very long time, if not forever. Particularly in our school district, they're using G Suite, and so Google has no real reason or real motivation to ever get rid of any of that work. The chances of that, at least in the form of data analytics, not existing for a very long time, are slim to none. Then on top of that, you have a number of different people who may or may not always understand the ramifications of technology. And this was not this year, this was past year. One of our kids' teachers were taking pictures and tweeting them from their classroom. And I'm sure many parents find that to be really great, that they have an opportunity to go explore their kids' learning and what's happening. But I think a lot of them don't always understand the dark side that comes with that, and the people that use those kinds of platforms to do bad things. And so neither of our kids really had any idea about it. And I think the entire time we were having the discussion, both my wife and I were asking ourselves in our heads, like, are they old enough to have this conversation? I mean, is this something we have to do? And while it's an uncomfortable moment, it's an uncomfortable idea, and it's an uncomfortable discussion to have, the truth is that this is important. And as our kids they're going back to school now, at least for the time being, but as we kind of watch news unfold in this country, a town just 7 miles away has their entire kindergarten class in quarantine right now. And so all of these kids are experiencing life through a computer. And as adults and as citizens of a community that exists to welcome other people and support other people who either work or live behind a computer, then those kids become our responsibility, and what they do online and how they experience the internet becomes our responsibility, particularly as parents. And so I appreciate you writing in, and I appreciate the kind words. What I would tell you, or what I would encourage you, is that anybody that has a concern, just treat it like public space. And this is what my wife and I told our kids. Treat it like public space. If you went out into a mall and you were sitting down in a mall and having a discussion with your teacher or your friends, the way that you would dress, the way that you would act, the things that you would say, the things that you would draw, the attention that you would give, those kinds of things, just do all of those things anytime you're doing something on your school. And I guess if I was to extend that out a little bit, school or work issued computer, and just be aware of the stuff that you're putting online and what you're and the way that you're interacting with those communities. It's scary that the information that is put on those devices, the length of time that those things are going to live in perpetuity. Hey, if you didn't get a chance, we invite you to go to podcast.asknoahshow.com. That is the place that we keep all of the links, the stuff that we didn't get to throughout the hour. Tons of links in there today. The interview that I referenced on Backblaze we didn't touch on the story and their storage pods, but the original interview is there. And so if you want to go back and read that, we invite you to do so. Additionally, again, I'd like to make a plea to join us on the Matrix instance and come and hang out. It's a fun place for people to hang out, and we have some people that join us there during the show and hang out with us as we record each Tuesday at 6 p.m. You're welcome to do that. The music means we're out of time. You can follow us, get the latest by following us on Twitter at Ask Noah Show. You can follow me personally at Colonel Linux. The Ask Noah Show continues next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. A huge thanks to Ben, our producer, Sarah, our call screener. This hour of the show may be more, but there's plenty more content for you at AskNoahShow.com.